Hi, I'm Shekhar Gupta and I'm going to talk to you about politics, elections and liberal values in India. And remember, I am not an academic or a scholar, I am a journalist. I speak from lived experiences, of course, from my readings and interactions with people who are much smarter and much brighter and much better than me. So, first of all, politics, elections and liberal values in India. You can reverse this equation. Liberal values, elections and politics in India. Why? Because for politics to take place, to happen, you need elections. Because somebody has to choose which politicians, politics has to be competitive, and that is done through elections. So the bedrock of politics is elections. But the bedrock of elections is liberal values, which means everybody is an equal, everybody has an equal right in every which way, but the most tangible equal right is the right to vote. So India was an unusual country which so early on, as far back as in 1950, decided to have universal franchise. Every Indian has a vote. So that itself calls for, that's a big move towards liberalism that India made. There were no categories that were disqualified, and nobody said let people get better educated, voting is only for better educated people or one gender or one upper caste, nothing of the sort. So the deep bedrock, the deep foundation of Indian democracy is liberalism. Everybody is equal. What is liberalism? Particularly in the Indian context, liberalism is basically, if I may simplify it, not bothering how your neighbor lives, prays, eats, what sexuality he or she has, what marital status he or she has, what happens in their family, what beliefs do they have vis-a-vis any policy that your government might have. That is just letting the other person be. And if you look at the way India has evolved, India actually is a very good advertisement for a liberal democracy, because everything about India told us, but seemed to indicate, if you were taking a theoretical view, that this cannot survive as a liberal democracy. Because remember, take yourself back to that period when decolonization was taking place. A new world was emerging after 2 world wars. The British were leaving a lot of their old colonies. The colonies had to discover new ways of governing themselves. The maps of a lot of the important parts and crucial parts of the world were being redrawn, not just then, but that process started a few decades earlier, in the 19th century itself, in those 50 years. So if for all the countries that came up around that time, or all the nation states that came up around that time, India was the most diverse. India was the most diverse in terms of religion, language, ethnicity, culture, eating habits, lifestyles, social practices. India has several societies which are matrilineal and several that are very patriarchal. But also it had one factor of diversity that no other country had, and that is caste. And when you have caste, you don't just talk about 4 castes. In each caste there are subcastes and subcastes and subcastes. So it was that diverse country that came into being, with a republican constitution and a liberal constitution. Now, fast forward and look at the state of the world today and compare that, say, with the mid-40s or 47 or 1950, whatever your reference point is. And you will find that of all the major diverse countries or nation states that came together in that period in the 19th century, between the 2 world wars or generally in that period, almost none except India has survived intact. Maybe Tanzania, but Tanzania is not as diverse as India, definitely not as big as India. all other diverse nation states that came up at that time have broken up. These include democracies, these include dictatorships of various kinds. The Soviet Union, as we know, broke up in so many parts, we sometimes were not able to keep count because they were breaking and then further breaking up. Czechoslovakia broke up, Yugoslavia broke up, all of the Balkans unraveled. Pakistan broke up into two. Even Indonesia, normally I would have said India, Indonesia and Tanzania survived, but even there, East Timor broke away. All of Africa's map has been redrawn, it's continuing to be redrawn. The Middle East, all these countries, perfect nations, nation states that the British and the French and the rest created by drawing straight lines on the maps of the Middle East, where there was very little diversity. More or less one faith, more or less one ethnicity in each geographical mass. So Iran had the Persians and the rest had the Arabs, etc., the Turkey had the Turks. All that has unraveled, because if all that had not unraveled, then ISIS and Caliphate, the whole idea would not have come up. On the other hand, India has not only stayed intact, no part of India has broken away. If anything, India is bigger than it was. India's territory has gone up compared to 1947. And in a very interesting way, its diversity has gone up. Why do I say so? Because India has added since 1947 the state of Sikkim to it. And Sikkim, it's a small population, it's a small state, but it's a distinct ethnicity. So it was just a couple of lakhs when Sikkim joined India, maybe now it's 500,000. But India has increased in size. India has not diminished. Pakistan, on the other hand, as you know, has broken up. Even in Kashmir, India has taken more territory than it had earlier. It's taken Siachen Glacier, for example. So, why has this happened? This happened, if India was not a liberal country, imagine what would happen. If India was not a liberal country, you would then be struggling to figure out what kind of nationalism will India build if it is not a liberal nationalism. So there was a Nehruvian approach to nationalism, which is essentially what India adopted. There were also many other approaches, including one to build a Hindu state. But the moment you say you build a Hindu state, you run into problems, because too many people in India are not Hindu. Too many people in India are Hindus, but don't subscribe to one set notion of Hinduism, because Hinduism is not a doctrinal faith with one written scripture. It's not a religion of the book. Third, if you say a Hindu state, then how do you divide power among the castes? So if you had defined India as a Hindu state to begin with, you would have always had a problem that today you're dealing with differently, and I will try and explain to you what this means. Can you use religion to unite what caste divided? Now you can say you may or may not like caste, but caste is reality. So if you use religion to unite what caste divided, then how do you translate this into a reality? So the so-called lower castes immediately become equally empowered as the upper castes. It's not going to happen. In fact, even today, the central binary in Indian politics is this: can you use caste to divide what religion united, or can you use religion to reunite what caste divided? Because when you can use religion to reunite what caste divided, the BJP wins, as happened after Ayodhya, Babri Masjid demolition, or as has happened now. When the opposite happens, caste is used successfully to divide religion, then other parties win. That's how Mulayam Singh Yadav, Lalu Yadav, Nitish Kumar, etc., came up in the heartland. And then you have other variations. Then you have the Tamils, for example, which had a strong Dravidian atheist movement. So what kind of a nation state will then you define? What kind of nationalism will you define, if not a liberal one, which then accommodates everybody? Because once again, Christians may be a very small percentage of India, but there are several states, Nagaland, Mizoram, where Christians are the overwhelming majority. So in which nationalism do you fit them in, if not in liberal nationalism? So liberalism for India was a given, and even today's government, they may swear by Hindutva, etc., but they still have to swear by liberal values. It's a liberal constitution. Your institutions are charged with protecting liberal values. So that one thing is not a matter of debate or argument, that India has to be a liberal, multicultural, multi-religious, secular, multi-ethnic state. In fact, if I have any complaint with the founders, including Nehru, it is that they gave us the wrong slogan by calling for unity in diversity. In fact, a better slogan for India and a more liberal slogan for India should still be celebrate diversity. Because the moment you say unity in diversity, then the next step is to homogenize everybody, and that runs into resistance from diverse groups and diverse streams of thought. In India, you should celebrate diversity, because diversity and liberalism provides India the immune system which has protected India all this while, as new nation states around the world have broken up, including those much more powerful than India militarily, economically, socially, in terms of social indicators. Take Soviet Union, for example. Because what does liberalism teach you? As I said in the very beginning, liberalism teaches you to live with your neighbor at peace and at ease, irrespective of how different your neighbor's lifestyle, religion, sexuality, economic status, etc. are. Look at the Middle East. Shia can't live with Sunni, Arab can't live with Persian, Kurds, nobody likes the Kurds, Muslims can't live with Yazidis, Jews and the Muslims are fighting in Jerusalem. So India has built this unique strength, unique immune system, which can only be sustained by liberalism. Because the moment any group of Indians starts telling another group that this is the way of running your life, which is the officially mandated or constitutionally mandated, or this is how our nationalism is defined, this immune system strikes back. Now, how do politics and elections come into it? Look at the way your constitutional structure is set. You have two houses in parliament. Why? Because one goes for direct elections, one party can win power, but the other house, the upper house, you cannot win the upper house immediately as you win the lower house, even if you sweep elections all over the country, because the upper house, 1/3 members retire every 2 years. So this is part of your immune system. And once again, your voters in the states might elect one party, in the center might elect one party. Voters have taken time becoming mature and learning this, but increasingly now you find that voters make their distinctions. See in Delhi, the latest elections that we had, BJP won 7 out of 7 seats in Delhi, got nearly, if not 60%, I think 57-8% of the vote. Now they are down to 42 and they won only 8 out of the 60 of the 70 seats in the state assembly. So voters now make a distinction. We saw similarly in Haryana. In May of 2019, BJP got nearly 60% of the vote. In 3 months, 4 months later, in spite of the fact that Article 370 had been abrogated, and Haryana is a state with many families who have somebody in the armed forces, etc., predominantly a Hindu state, barring 1 or 2 small constituencies, no real Muslim vote, BJP's vote percentage fell by 23 percentage points, because people make a distinction voting for parliament and voting for the state. And when they vote for the state like this, while they are keeping the dominant party out of power in their state, or say in the case of Haryana, making them share power with somebody, they also make sure that the ruling party then cannot have the upper house, Rajya Sabha, the ruling party in Lok Sabha cannot have the same numbers reflect in Rajya Sabha as well. So checks and balances remain. So elections, that's why, are very, very, very important. Through elections you get power, and for elections you need politics. Now, if you look at the history of Indian liberalism, I'd say Nehru founded the liberal thought, 1947 onwards. But was he a perfect liberal? No, he was not a perfect liberal, because remember, he was very impatient and very irritable when it came to the kind of criticism that was being thrown at him, not so much from the right then, but from the left. So the people he imprisoned on freedom of speech issues were people of the left, and some of the people we know very well, film stars or heroes or stars of popular culture, Majroor Sultanpuri, the lyricist, Balraj Sahni, the actor, they were jailed. And also, Nehru made an amendment to Article 19 of the Constitution on the belief that freedom of speech can't be total. Now, problem is, once you do a bad thing, it remains done, because nobody corrects it. Mrs. Gandhi, later on, Indira Gandhi, we refer to Indira Gandhi as Mrs. Gandhi, Sonia Gandhi as Sonia Gandhi. When she took over complete power in the country during the emergency and extended the term of Lok Sabha by 1 year, because she didn't want to face elections just then. And when she had locked up opposition MPs in her jail, she got that parliament to amend the constitution to add the words secular and socialist in the preamble of the constitution. If you read the debates of the Constituent Assembly, Ambedkar and many of the other wise people had said there is no need to do this. There is enough in the constitution that tells you that these are the principles of this state or this constitution. It's just that one generation cannot set all principles for all times to come, because this is a republic. People will decide at various points of time. But the fact is, she added that. I know that there are many governments will come and go, and have come and gone since then, who don't like those two words there, but nobody could change it. Similarly, the amendment Nehru made to Article 19 stays, and that causes a lot of problems now and brings in a lot of challenges. Courts also have to go by the word of the constitution, and even if you argue for total freedom in public debate, you are told that, oh, but Nehru made this amendment. Still, with all his flaws, Nehru set up quite a liberal system. Take your mind back to 1950, when India was so poor and so illiterate. At that point, we thought of these very liberal ideas and set up the institutions. There were others also. They set up the institutions to protect liberalism. And because through liberalism come our elections, through which grows our politics, and together they keep the state and the people of India, of a very diverse country, together. Now, at different points of time, different leaders have redefined or changed Indian liberalism. I'd say since Nehru, nobody's been as plainly liberal as he, with his flaws. Indira Gandhi was much less liberal than Nehru. Shastri was there for too small a time for us to assess him on these parameters. He was there for a short while, and that short while was also spent dealing with crisis, including a war, 1965, at a time when India was not in very good shape. But Indira Gandhi reversed Nehruvian liberalism. And we know the history, we know how she passed many new laws, nationalizing a lot of the private sector, which she should not have done. At one point, she even nationalized grain trade, and then disaster hit India's villages. And that was the one thing which she reversed because she figured that she had done something wrong. Once again, she did it out of arrogance. It was not a liberal move, it was a leftist move, but basically inspired by her leftist ideologue, bureaucrats, or sort of darbaris who didn't understand politics, who didn't understand the pulse of the people, and who took this illiberal step. But the most illiberal thing she did was to bring in the emergency. But also remember, the same leader who brought in the emergency was enjoying total power. And it's not as if emergency was seemingly very unpopular. There were grievances, but she could have carried on, or she could have rigged an election. But she withdrew the emergency, she held an election, she lost that election, she handed power back, power to her adversaries, and then that government broke up, Janata Party. They did a lot of cleanup in the constitution that Mrs. Gandhi had polluted through her illiberal amendments. So they reversed a lot of those. They did not reverse, however, some. They did not reverse the one where she changed the preamble, and also where she inserted the idea as a charter of fundamental duties along with fundamental rights. That is something that Mr. Modi quotes all the time. But it needs reminding that this was also inserted by Mrs. Gandhi during the emergency through an illegitimate parliament. Since then, I would say this was a big victory for Indian republicanism, liberalism, libertarianism, but since then the movement has not been forward. The movement has generally been backwards, and there are many reasons for this. One is that India's politics got divided. Politics got divided not just in a straight binary of two parties, but many parties, and politics broke up in many states. And just as there was one dynasty dominating politics in India, now many dynasties came up all over the country. Second, in the aftermath of the emergency, a certain amount of bitterness remained between the Congress party and the Gandhi family and the rest, particularly the Jan Sangh, which later became BJP, and the Congress party. Third, India entered the era of coalition governments. Now, coalition governments, maybe some other time we can talk about whether they've been good or bad for India, but the fact is, in coalition governments, it's difficult for dominant leaders to take the polity into any direction. Good thing is they also can't reverse it very much. So India had, on the larger constitutional democratic plane, had a kind of status quo for a long time. That has now begun to change. Now that India once again has a government with a brute majority, brute is a bad word, once again has a government with a strong, clear majority, and now in the second term. Because this government now feels that they have the mandate to bring about some fundamental changes to how India is governed, fundamental changes to how Indian nationalism is defined, and fundamental changes also on how liberal institutions should function. Because remember, in a liberal democracy, institutions should not be bound by the power of the majority. Because if the power of the majority was to decide everything, then why would you need a Supreme Court, an election commission, or any of the other institutions? Institutions in a democracy serve a basic purpose, and that basic purpose is to protect the citizen from majoritarian excess. So instead of thinking that institutions should only do what the majority tells them to do, in fact, the function of the institutions is exactly the opposite of that. That's why just one judge of Allahabad High Court, through one judgment, could set aside Mrs. Indira Gandhi's election and set in motion that whole crisis, because he had the ability, because of his institutional power, to do so. That's how a democracy is built. Now, once again, go back to politics, because politics helps you fight elections. Elections get you power. But to fight elections, to run your politics, you need money. Where does that money come from? So how do you fund elections? Elections have become very expensive in India, although Election Commission has its rules about how much you can spend, etc., but nobody's quite followed those rules. So in the past, It was all done by giving people money in bags or wheelbarrows. It was all done with cash. How to bring about reform in electoral funding is the oldest and as yet failed or unsettled debate in our politics. Now, the BJP government, in its first term, came up with the idea of electoral bonds. They passed a law through parliament, and frankly, even the opposition did not quite understand what was going on. And in the process, these anonymous electoral bonds have come in. What happens there? You go to State Bank of India, only State Bank of India can do it. During a certain window in a year, you buy bonds. These are bearer bonds, they don't carry anybody's name. So buy these bonds, they're like currency for all practical purposes. Currency with one line left blank, where you can write the name of the recipient party. So basically, nobody knows who has got this money, which party has got how much money. I mean, there are activists and there are think tanks, there are people like Association of Democratic Rights, ADR, who give you some data, but the data is never officially released. But remember, there is one trick there. That is that the State Bank of India knows who's bought which bond, because bonds are numbered. So, and State Bank of India is a government organization. So government always knows who has bought bonds worth how much and given what contribution to which party. This makes the equation very heavily or much too heavily loaded in favor of the ruling party. So when this law was passed, Arun Jaitley had then said that I agree that this is not a perfect solution, but it's a step forward to the extent that now you don't need to bring cash in wheelbarrows. Companies can give this money, they take it on their balance sheet. On the balance sheet, they don't have to say who they give this money to. It is a tax exempt thing for them. So at least you are now moving from cash to check payment. But that is a very small consolation, because electoral funding in India is still very opaque. And if electoral funding is opaque and can be misused by whoever is in power, then it makes your elections an unfair contest. Even in IPL, when an auction takes place, it's not as if one team is owned by the country's biggest industrialist, so they can spend 100 times more than the others. They cannot. There are limits to what you can spend. That kind of regulation is needed to create a level playing field. That is not available in India yet, and that's an ongoing debate. So once again, the three things we talk about, politics, elections, liberalism, are all interlinked. Remember, again, India is India and stays together because it's a liberal democracy. So the only nationalism that works is a liberal nationalism, because Indian diversity is India's immune system. Even when you have governments or leaders with dictatorial tendencies, what ultimately counters them is India's diversity. And that is a given, because if you push at it, it will be tough to keep this country together. If you take everything into account, and look at your balance sheet over 70 years, I'd say India's record, given the beginning it had made, is about 6.5 out of 10. So it is still the first division, but it is not distinction